You hang in there, you follow the rules, and you don't f with us, and you'll get out of this alive.
These fucks!
Let's see if you taste as good as your brother.
Like and subscribe may look simple to you, but for us, it's very valuable. So make sure to support us, and thank you for watching.
The movie begins with Earl, a cop, arriving at a quiet gas station liquor store combo. He greets the people inside and complains about the heat. Pete, the counter guy, disagrees, mentioning the air conditioning. After some small talk, Earl asks for a drink, hinting at a rough day. They discuss a recent bank robbery that left several law enforcement officers dead. Earl promises justice before excusing himself to the bathroom. Suddenly, two men in suits, Seth and Richie, appear, holding the customers hostage at gunpoint. Seth demands to know if Pete is playing games. Pete, terrified, insists he's following orders and sends Earl to the bathroom to avoid suspicion. Richie, suspicious, accuses Pete of signaling Earl, but Pete denies it. Hearing Earl's footsteps, the two men force everyone to act naturally.
Everybody be cool. You be cool.
Earl returns, pays for his drink, and heads out, only for Richie to suddenly shoot him in the back of the head. Blood splatters on Pete, who is in shock. Seth, furious, asks Richie why he did it. Richie claims Pete mouthed, "Help us," to Earl, but Pete denies it. Despite this, Richie shoots Pete too. Seth and Richie argue over whether Pete actually mouthed anything. Seth, eager to leave, tells Richie to start the car. With his last bit of strength, Pete grabs a gun and shoots Richie in the hand, triggering a chaotic shootout as bottles shatter. Hiding behind the aisle, Seth dismisses Pete's cries of innocence, saying it doesn't matter now since Pete shot Richie. He gives Pete 2 seconds to live and tells Richie to shoot the bottles behind him on the count of 3, which Richie agrees to with excitement. As Seth counted to 3, the two women hostages fled, screaming. At 3, Richie fired wildly at the bottles behind the counter. Pete tried to rise but failed. Seth tossed a burning tissue at him, engulfing Pete in flames. The men watched grimly as Pete screamed in agony. Suddenly, Pete, still burning, staggered up, firing wildly. Startled, Seth and Richie shot back. Pete collapsed onto an aisle, still on fire, screaming until he died. Unmoved, Seth and Richie watched, and Richie casually grabbed a road map. As they left, Seth erupted.
I said buy the road map and leave. What the fuck am I supposed to do?
Behind them, the store exploded. Richie insisted Pete had recognized them, especially Seth. Seth, furious, reminded Richie they needed to stay low profile. The scene shifts to their drive through an isolated landscape. Seth pops pills with alcohol, while Richie tends to his wounded hand. They stop at a small hotel. Seth gets a room key, but Richie, unimpressed, asks, "Cable? Waterbed?" Seth shrugs.
Yeah, 4 walls and a roof, and that's all we need.
They drag a woman from the trunk and warn her to stay quiet. Inside, Seth patches up Richie's hand and promises to get some money. Richie sits, eerily staring at the woman. Seth returns with news of a meeting at the border with someone named Carlos to settle their debt. Richie, unhappy with their 30% cut, tries to push Seth for more, but Seth silences him. Seth then gives the woman an ultimatum: stay quiet, obey, and she'll live. After leaving, Richie invites her to watch a movie with him, and she reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, at a diner, a father eats with his 2 teenagers. They plan to reach El Paso soon and stop at a motel. The son goes to the bathroom, and the daughter mentions a call from Bethel Priest. Her dad, indifferent, brushes it off. When she asks if he no longer believes in God, he admits he does, but no longer loves him. She wonders what their mom would think, but the dad curtly reminds her that their mother is gone and can't offer an opinion. The scene shifts to a news broadcast detailing the Gecko brothers' crime spree. Seth Gecko had been serving time for a bank robbery, and his brother Richard had escaped during a courthouse hearing, killing multiple law enforcement officers and a school teacher. The news reports the recent deaths of Earl and Pete, bringing the death toll to 16, 5 Texas Rangers, 8 officers, and 3 civilians, including a mother of 4. Seth returns with food and asks Richie for updates. Richie informs him that authorities plan to catch them within 48 hours. Seth decides they must cross the border tonight and meet Carlos in Mexico. Suddenly, Seth notices the woman is missing from her chair and asks Richie where she is. Richie points to the bedroom. Seth bursts in and finds the woman shot, blood everywhere. Stunned, Seth demands to know if Richie did it. Richie explains that she tried to escape once Seth left. Enraged, Seth chokes Richie, shouting that he doesn't harm women and that Richie crosses a line. After pushing Richie against the wall, Seth calms down, telling him everything will be fine once they're in Mexico. Meanwhile, the dad and his kids from the restaurant check into the same motel as the Geckos. The kids argue about the motel's condition, but the dad dismisses their concerns, only wanting a bed. As they park, Seth crosses in front of their car, causing the dad to brake abruptly. Disturbed by the encounter, they continue inside. Later, a knock on the door wakes the dad from his nap. He notices his son, unaware of the noise, practicing guitar with earphones. After another knock, the dad shouts,
What? I'm your neighbor.
Reluctantly, the dad opens the door to find Richie, who asks to borrow an ice bucket. The dad agrees, only to turn around and see Richie pointing a gun at his face. Seth then bursts in, punching Jacob the dad onto the bed. Richie orders the kid to drop his guitar, and Seth, aiming a gun at Jacob, demands his name. Jacob complies, and Seth forces both him and his son onto the bed at gunpoint. When Seth mistakes the son for Japanese, Jacob corrects him.
So what's the story with you two? You a couple of fags?
He's my son.
How's that happen? You don't look Japanese.
Neither does he. He looks Chinese.
Oh, well, excuse me, all the hell.
Jacob asks if this is about money, but Seth clarifies they need his help, not his money. Jacob's daughter rushes in, greeted by Seth's gun. Jacob tries to calm her as Seth demands the motorhome key, which Jacob says is on the dresser. Seth, noticing Richie leering at the girl, orders Richie to get the motorhome while he keeps an eye on her. Seth warns her to cooperate or risk her father's life. She quickly dresses and heads to the bathroom. Jacob offers them the motorhome, but Seth insists they'll take a ride, threatening Jacob's son when he protests. Jacob reluctantly agrees. They drive off in the motorhome, Richie aiming a gun at the kids while Jacob drives with Seth beside him. Seth tells Richie to put in his invisible brace, and Richie complies, explaining to the puzzled kids that he grinds his teeth. Seth asks Jacob about his kids, Scott and Kate, and, after finding a family photo, inquires about Jacob's wife. Jacob explains she passed away in a car accident. Noticing a minister's ID in Jacob's wallet, Seth asks if he was a preacher, to which Jacob replies he was. Seth pushes for more, but Jacob shows no interest in talking. Seth agrees to stop asking questions, but warns that if Jacob doesn't help them cross into Mexico, he and his family will be killed. At border control, Seth tells Scott to sit in the front while he takes Kate and Richie into another room. Scott urges Jacob to tell the officers what's happening, but Seth refuses. In the back, Richie holds a gun to Kate's face, growing increasingly anxious. Seth tells him to shut up as Scott tries to convince Jacob to tell the officers, believing it's their only way out. Jacob asks Scott to trust him, assuring him not to say anything. A cop approaches and asks Jacob who's with him. Jacob replies it's just him and his son, taking him to a bullfight. In the back, Richie panics about the cops, and Seth punches him to keep him quiet. The commotion draws the cops' attention, and Jacob accidentally mentions his daughter in the bathroom, despite claiming only his son was with him.
Thought you said it was just you and your son.
The cop asks to search the vehicle, knocking on the bathroom door. Kate, sitting on the toilet, says it's occupied. The cop apologizes after opening the door and shuts it. After the close call, Kate glances at Seth, hiding behind the shower curtain with an unconscious Richie. They successfully pass through the patrol and enter Mexico. Seth, feeling more trusting, guides Jacob to a bar called the Titty Twister, which Jacob reluctantly agrees to visit. As they drove into the sunset, Seth woke Richie, who seemed disoriented and didn't remember what happened. Seth lied, saying Richie fainted from pain and hit the bathroom on the way down. While they argued, Jacob announced they'd arrived. The bar was wild, with drunken patrons dancing and an announcer making lewd promises. Seth told everyone to act normal, enter, order a drink, and wait for Carlos without causing trouble. At the gate, the announcer tried to stop them, but Seth beat him up and got inside, throwing extra punches for good measure. Inside, the bar was chaotic with half-naked women dancing, fights breaking out, and a band playing. Seth liked the place and ordered whiskey, but the bartender drank it himself, saying the bar was for bikers and truckers only.
Bikers and truckers only.
As tension rose, Jacob stepped in, confirming he was a trucker. After checking Jacob's ID, the bartender reluctantly served them. Soon, the bartender introduced the main act, a seductive dancer performing with a snake. Her slow, captivating dance mesmerized everyone, and she focused her attention on Richie, ending her performance with a crowd cheer. Just then, the guard Seth had hit entered with goons, pointing to their table. Seth warned Richie as the thugs approached. A fight broke out, with Richie getting stabbed in his wounded hand. Seth retaliated, shooting the attackers. After taking them down, they warned the crowd to stay seated, only for the guard to laugh from behind.
You think it was funny?
And shot him dead. Meanwhile, the dancer fixated on Richie's bleeding hand, transforming into a monstrous creature. Kate tried to warn Richie, but it was too late. The creature bit his neck. Seth fired, but Richie died in his arms, cursing the creature. As chaos erupted, the men Seth and Richie had beaten transformed into wolf-like aliens, and the bar staff joined in, attacking patrons. Hiding behind a bar stool, Kate defended herself, using her cross to fight off the transformed guard. During the struggle, she dropped the cross into his mouth, causing him to melt, splattering her and Scott with his remains. Amid the mayhem, another man saved Seth and Jacob by ripping out an alien's heart. A survivor stabbed the heart into another creature, killing it instantly. With their group ready for battle, they fought off the remaining monsters. Scott and Kate rushed to the door, but it was locked. Seth approached Richie, lying in a pool of blood, and warned off another guy trying to attack him. Jacob urged Seth to kill Richie, realizing he had turned. After a moment of hesitation, Seth accepted the truth and stabbed Richie, granting him peace in death. They heard noises outside, which Seth dismissed as bats. While locking the doors, they took turns killing any remaining vampires. One guy, bitten during the fight, hid the bite under his jacket without telling the others. As they regrouped, Seth declared they were fighting vampires and asked if anyone had crosses. Scott suggested improvising a cross from bar items. They discussed ways to kill vampires: sunlight, garlic, silver. The bitten man began to ramble about vampires until Seth interrupted, telling Jacob, the former preacher, that his faith could save them. Jacob punched Seth, thinking he was mocking him, but Seth insisted Jacob was key to their survival. Reluctantly, Jacob agreed. Kate, unnerved by the bat's noise, urged him to hurry. The bitten man, growing delirious, heard voices urging him to kill. In the chaos, he bit another man, who in turn bit Jacob. In the struggle, the vampire was thrown out the window, letting the bats swarm in. Seth quickly led Kate and Scott to a cave-like area of the bar. Kate wanted to save Jacob, but Seth claimed he was already dead. Jacob, hiding behind the bar, crafted a cross and made his way to Seth and the kids. Admitting he'd been bitten, Jacob promised to help them escape before he turned. In a storage room, they prepared weapons, and Jacob asked them to kill him if he turned. They reluctantly agreed. As the vampires attacked, Jacob led with the cross while Seth and the others fought fiercely. In the battle, Jacob began transforming. Scott, shocked, gasped "Dad" as Jacob bit him. In a panic, Scott splashed holy water on him, partially melting his vampire face before shooting his father. Distraught, Scott's cries drew the vampires to him. Despite Kate's attempts to save him, she was forced to shoot her brother, killing him. With limited bullets, Seth and Kate found themselves surrounded by vampires. Rays of light streaming through holes in the ceiling began to burn the creatures. Realizing this, Seth instructed Kate to shoot at the ceiling to create more holes. She complied, letting more light in, which burned the vampires. Suddenly, they heard someone shouting for Seth. It was Carlos. Seth yelled for him to shoot the door. When it burst open, sunlight flooded in, causing the vampires to burn and explode. Seth and Kate rushed outside toward Carlos, who was shaken by the chaotic scene. Seth punched Carlos, furious about meeting him at the bar. Carlos explained he'd never been there before but thought it was safe since it only operated from dusk till dawn. Seth angrily blamed him for the loss of his brother and Kate's family. When Carlos asked how he could make it right, Seth negotiated his payment down from 30% to 20%. Seth then apologized to Kate, handing her some money. She asked to join him, but he refused and drove off with Carlos into the desert.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch other recaps on the screen. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.